If you think family conflicts are complicated, the Grégory Affair shows how they can spiral into something far more disturbing, something that destroys not just relationships, but entire lives, and leaves a country asking the same question for decades. Who killed a 4-year-old boy? Because this is not just a murder case. It is a story of anonymous terror, buried resentment, fractured trust, and a mystery so deeply tangled that even today, the truth remains out of reach. And it all begins in a quiet corner of France, with a family that had no idea they were already living inside a nightmare. Grégory Villemin was just 4 years old in October 1984. He lived in a small, peaceful village in eastern France, where life was supposed to be simple. The kind of place where days pass slowly, where neighbors know each other, and where nothing truly horrific is expected to happen. But behind that calm surface, something dark had already taken root in the Villemin family. It didn't begin with violence. It began with messages, anonymous letters, strange phone calls, threats that started small but grew more personal over time. At first, the family didn't understand what was happening. Then they realized someone was targeting them deliberately. The calls became frequent, sometimes relentless, coming in at all hours of the day. The voice on the other end was often calm, controlled, almost amused, like someone playing a long psychological game. The caller gave himself a name, the Raven, and the Raven didn't just threaten. He observed. He spoke about their lives as if he was inside them. He referenced private disputes, family tensions, and secrets that should have been known only to those closest to them. That detail changed everything, because it meant one terrifying possibility. The Raven wasn't an outsider. He could be family, and that idea began to poison everything. Suspicion crept into conversations. Relatives began looking at each other differently. Old resentments resurfaced. Minor disagreements became evidence. The Villemin family, once connected, slowly fractured into silent accusations and unspoken distrust. And in the middle of it all was little Grégory, growing up inside a house filled with fear that he could not possibly understand. As time went on, the threats escalated. The Raven stopped being vague. He became specific. He mentioned the child directly. He warned that something would happen to him. He claimed he could see him. And then, as suddenly as they started, the calls stopped. Silence fell over the family. For a moment, there was hope that it was over, that the nightmare had passed, but it hadn't. On the evening of October 16, 1984, Grégory was outside playing near his home. It was a normal evening, the kind of moment no one would ever expect to turn into tragedy. The sky was fading, the air was calm, and nothing suggested that anything was wrong. Then a phone rang inside the house. A message came through that shattered everything. Someone claimed that Grégory had been taken and thrown into a nearby river. What followed was chaos. Family members rushed outside. Neighbors were called. Search efforts began almost immediately. The river nearby was searched under fading light and rising panic. Every passing minute made the fear worse. And then, later that night, the worst was confirmed. Grégory Villemin's body was found in the water. His hands and feet had been tied. A rope secured him tightly. He was still wearing the clothes he had on when he left the house to play. There were no obvious signs of struggle, no clear explanation, just a small body in cold water and a silence that felt impossible to accept. The entire country reacted instantly. France was shocked. A child had been murdered in a way so disturbing that it dominated national attention overnight. Newspapers, television, and radio all focused on the same question. Who could do something like this? But the answer didn't come quickly. Instead, the investigation exploded into confusion. Police were overwhelmed. Every possible lead was explored. But one theory stood out above all others: the anonymous caller known as the Raven. Was the murderer the same person who had been terrorizing the family for years? Or was the Raven simply a distraction, hiding something closer to home? Investigators soon discovered that the situation might be even more complicated. The Raven may not have been a single individual. There were inconsistencies in the letters and calls, differences in tone, variations in writing style. Some experts believe multiple people could have been involved, possibly coordinating or even competing in their harassment. That theory changed everything, because now suspicion was no longer just directed outward. It was turning inward, toward the family itself. As investigators dug deeper, attention began focusing on extended relatives, including Bernard Laroche, a cousin of Gregory's father. He was part of the family circle. He had access. He was present in their lives, and certain details began to raise questions. Handwriting analysis suggested possible similarities between him and some of the threatening letters. His whereabouts during key moments on the day of the crime were not fully accounted for. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to raise suspicion. And in a case like this, suspicion spreads quickly and deeply. Witness statements complicated things further. Some relatives claimed to have seen unusual behavior or events connected to the day Gregory disappeared. One young family member even gave a detailed account suggesting that the child had been taken by someone known to the family. But those statements later changed. Some were retracted, others contradicted earlier versions. Whether they were influenced, misunderstood, or simply false became one of the central questions of the case. The truth became harder and harder to separate from fear. Meanwhile, the media transformed the investigation into a national obsession. Every detail was dissected. Every family member became a potential suspect in the public eye. Every silence was interpreted as guilt. The Villemin family, already under immense emotional strain, now lived under the gaze of an entire nation. And then the case took another turn. Bernard Laroche was arrested. The evidence against him was still largely circumstantial, but the pressure to find someone responsible was immense. Authorities believed they were closing in on the truth, but the case began to unravel. Key evidence was challenged. Witness statements became unreliable. Handwriting analysis was disputed by experts. The foundation of the accusation weakened. Eventually, Bernard Laroche was released, but the damage was already done. Inside the Villemin family, trust had completely collapsed. Grief had turned into anger. Fear had turned into certainty for some, and justice in the traditional sense no longer felt possible. Gregory's father, Jean-Marie Villemin, became convinced that the legal system would not deliver answers. In his mind, the truth was already known. It simply wasn't being acted upon. And in one of the most shocking moments in French criminal history, Jean-Marie confronted Bernard Laroche and shot him dead. The act stunned the country. It added another layer of tragedy to an already devastating case. Now, instead of one unresolved murder, there was also an act of revenge that would further divide public opinion. But even after this, the central question remained unanswered. Who killed Gregory? As the investigation continued, attention shifted again, this time toward Gregory's mother, Christine Villemin. Handwriting analysis suggested possible connections between her writing and the anonymous letters. Witnesses claimed to have seen her in locations linked to the case. She was arrested. Public opinion turned quickly, fueled by media speculation and the emotional weight of the crime. But once again, the evidence was not strong enough. Like others before her, she was eventually released. No one could be definitively proven guilty. Not Bernard Laroche, not Christine Villemin, not any single family member. And that uncertainty created something even more disturbing than the crime itself: the possibility that multiple people were involved. Investigators began exploring the idea that the Raven letters may have been written by more than one person. A combination of family members, influenced by resentment, jealousy, or long-standing disputes. A shared responsibility for a psychological campaign that spiraled far beyond control. But even that theory could not fully explain the physical murder of a child. Years passed, then decades. The case was reopened multiple times as forensic science advanced. DNA testing was conducted on letters, envelopes, and the bindings used on Gregory. Each time, investigators hoped for a breakthrough. Each time, the results were inconclusive. No definitive match, no final answer. The case remained frozen in uncertainty. Even those involved in the investigation were not untouched by its weight. One judge who oversaw early proceedings became overwhelmed by the pressure, criticism, and scrutiny surrounding the case, eventually taking his own life years later. The Grégory Affair had become more than a criminal investigation. It had become a permanent wound in French history, and through it all, the Villemin family remained trapped in a story they could not escape. A story of grief layered with suspicion, of love fractured by doubt, of a child whose life ended far too soon, surrounded by accusations that still have no final resolution. Because the most haunting part of this case is not just what happened, it is what remains unknown. Every theory points in a different direction, every suspect carries uncertainty, every answer creates new questions, and at the center of it all is a 4-year-old boy whose name continues to echo through decades of unresolved investigation. So even now, the question remains the same. Who killed little Grégory Villemin? And how many truths are still buried beneath the silence?